the leading cardiologist in the world, published more papers than anyone, is leading what I would say is going to be a revolution in medicine. And part of that revolution is taking a second look at the childhood vaccine program. If you don't know who Dr. Peter McCullough is, then take a look at this.
Joining me now is Dr. Peter McCullough.
Dr. Peter McCullough.
Dr. Peter McCullough.
I want to thank you for your courage. Thank you for your dedication.
There have been 2 waves of injury to the world. The first has been the SARS-CoV-2 infection, and then the second wave of injury now has been the COVID-19 vaccines.
I've testified under oath that 2/3 of 1 million lives lost could have been saved.
Explosive chest pain, early heart failure, EKG, and massive troponin rises we see with vaccine-induced myocarditis.
The great concern now is that COVID-19 vaccines promote cancer, and multiple administrations of a COVID-19 vaccine could accelerate into a turbo cancer.
There should be a complete moratorium on messenger RNA genetic vaccines.
We've all called for these vaccines to be removed from the market because they're not safe for human use.
Messenger RNA is now on the schedule without any concerns for safety by the ACIP panel. I've called in the U.S. Senate, now the European Parliament. I am recommending a halt on all childhood vaccines, the entire vaccine schedule. If it's not safe, it doesn't have any role in American medicine.
Well, he's the most published cardiologist in the world. He also wrote more papers on COVID in the middle of COVID than any other doctor. And so when he started speaking out about the mRNA technology and the COVID-19 vaccine, we certainly pricked up our ears, and we've been speaking with him throughout this experience. And it's my honor and pleasure right now to be joined by Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me.
The CDC recently just put out a video, Mandy Cohen, and this is right in your wheelhouse, talking about myocarditis. So let's just start here. Here's what the CDC believes everyone in America should know. Take a look at this.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Mandy Cohen from the CDC. I wanted to talk today about the COVID-19 vaccine and kids. While we know kids are less impacted than adults from COVID, the unfortunate news is that kids can still get sick, and sometimes really sick from COVID-19, just like adults. In fact, half of the very young kids who ended up in the intensive care unit with COVID had no underlying medical reason to make us think they would get sick. They didn't have asthma or another underlying condition. The COVID virus just made them really sick. Second, the vaccine is safe for all kids over 6 months. Millions of doses have been given to children, and their safety has been closely tracked. The benefits to children and teens outweigh the risks, especially the risks to kids if they get COVID-19. For example, teen boys have been up to 5 times as likely to have heart inflammation after having a COVID infection than after getting vaccinated. Now, I have 2 daughters, ages 9 and 11, and we plan to get them both the updated COVID vaccine. Talk to your child's pediatrician or nurse practitioner about the updated COVID vaccine today, and they can get their flu vaccine at the same time.
All right, Dr. McCullough, this is obviously something you've spoken out a lot about. She is claiming, and the CDC is making the claim, that you're 5 times more likely to have your heart swelled as a teenage boy if you get infected by COVID than if you got the vaccine. Give me your elevator pitch. You're talking to a brand new doctor that just heard this. They think this is the truth. What would you say to counteract or refute the statement just made by the CDC?
In 2020, before the vaccines, there was an exhaustive investigation looking for COVID illness causing myocarditis. Daniels and colleagues in JAMA, after they screened thousands and thousands of Big Ten athletes, found a handful of cases of putative myocarditis, no hospitalizations, no deaths. A paper by 2 Valiant colleagues looking across Israel found no increase in myocarditis in 2020 with the infection alone. Screening programs in the US military and the Israeli military were dropped because they couldn't find myocarditis. A false talking point came from inpatient data sets that found elevations of troponins in people having COVID illness in the hospital, as they would with a pneumococcal or other illness, not adjudicated cases of myocarditis. So it's a false talking point that COVID illness causes more myocarditis than the vaccines. Enter the vaccines. Now we had explosive cases of myocarditis. The FDA warned us in June of 2021 that the COVID vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines, cause myocarditis. Now fatal cases started coming in by a vaccine-induced myocarditis, not the respiratory infection, by Verma, Troy, Gill, Patone. These are disastrous cases. We now have thousands upon thousands of vaccine myocarditis cases in the US CDC vaccine adverse event reporting system. So it's the vaccines causing myocarditis, not the illness.
When you watch this, and you've been a doctor your whole life in the United States of America, this is really the leading authority in medicine. That most doctors don't go beyond, they don't research beyond what they're being told. Whatever the CDC says, that's the law. That's the religion, if you will. I mean, it's almost as though this is the dictate down to all doctors. What do you think about this agency and the United States of America and the state of medicine now that could be so off target on this?
There's a willful blindness to safety. Gill and colleagues published 2 Pfizer vaccine cases of boys age 16 and 17 on days 3 and 4 after their dose. And she's telling America that these vaccines are safe. And there's autopsy-proven vaccine deaths in adolescents. It's irresponsible for a public health director to not warn Americans that their children could die after taking one of these vaccines.
One of the things I always think about when we think of benefit and risk, and we got into the study that they're pointing to saying that it's higher in hospitalizations, as I think you've pointed out. If you only look at hospitalizations, you're only looking at severe cases, and then so you have a very select group that you're even comparing to when you talk about the unvaccinated. You're not talking about all the asymptomatic that never saw medical attention, had some sniffles. Those aren't being counted in, so it's not a fair comparison. But even if we were to say that the vaccine causes just as much myocarditis as a natural infection, which we know isn't true, but let's just say that it did. The thing that I always think we forget about is when we talk about vaccinations, we're talking about giving it to everybody. And so, a virus, you may or may not catch it. It may or may not be around you. There is still some roll of the dice whether you're going to have that infection. So shouldn't we be discussing an idea that you're giving this product to everybody, meaning you're putting them all on this list of possible danger, whereas in the natural world, you're not necessarily on that list? Does that make sense? I mean, it's something I never hear anyone talking about.
It's true. It's illogical. What she's saying is she's claiming the virus causes myocarditis, so let's give a vaccine that causes more myocarditis.
Right.
The reality is, in a paper by Daexer and colleagues from Germany, 48,000 Germans, what we've learned is that the vast majority of people getting COVID are fully vaccinated. So if they have a problem like myocarditis or long COVID, it's both the vaccine and the illness.
Right.
So we don't give a vaccine that causes a complication to try to do something about an infection that would cause a milder complication. Right. It just simply doesn't make sense.
You're just increasing the amount of dangerous situations you're putting yourself in. All right, you've been really clear on COVID, and that was something that I look at all those plaques behind you, this illustrious career. Once you started speaking out on COVID, you obviously were taking a great risk. You're taking a risk because you're going against the medical establishment. We're really proud of you for doing that. I think you've saved millions of lives because of it. You've been very outspoken, but you've even gone a step further now. Just over the last couple of months, and really over the last year or so, we've been in conversation, but you're starting to look at the childhood vaccine program. In fact, in our sizzle there, you were sort of calling for a moratorium right now, or at least a pause to take a look at the entire childhood vaccine program. You made a very strong statement recently. I want to play this, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. Let's take a look at this.
Let me tell you what, Andy Wakefield was right. And all Andy Wakefield was saying is that maybe it's too intense. Maybe we ought to just kind of spread them out. That's all he was really saying. If I was a young parent today, what I would do
is I would forego the vaccines. I'm now vaccine risk aware.
Okay, so now you have stepped on the third rail of all third rails. I mean, there's one thing to call out a new mRNA technology in vaccines. Everyone want to say that this is a one-off. A lot of doctors and scientists. Not only are you now saying, and maybe you've changed your mind, but in that statement you're saying you would consider not giving it to your kids if you were there, and then you brought up the cardinal sin of all cardinal sins, saying that Dr. Andrew Wakefield was onto something. I mean, this is the big bad guy of all of medicine. He's actually in textbooks in medicine around. I've been told when they talk about fraud, there's a page where he's there. Now, of course, I made a movie with Dr. Andrew Wakefield, Vaxxed. I agree with you, but help me understand how this journey worked for you. How have you gone from just looking at one vaccine? You are highly educated. You reference more science than anyone I've ever met. And for a doctor that's watching right now that is like, look, I'm willing to look at the COVID vaccine, but I'm not going to touch the childhood vaccine. How do you start this conversation? What is this journey? What took you on this journey?
I think the straw that broke the camel's back is when the CDC ACIP panel put the messenger RNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna for COVID, on the childhood vaccine schedule down to age 6 months. And the question I asked Del is, if this group recommends that vaccine in the schedule, what else have they overlooked in terms of safety or lack of a clinical rationale? So I started to take a careful look at the schedule. And let me say personally, I took all the vaccines in the schedule. In fact, I grew up in a time where the polio vaccine failed, so I took more. I didn't get enough MMR antibody response. I went to medical school. I took more shots. Del, I counted up. I've taken 69 vaccine shots in my life, 69, including 40 flu shots mandatory to be on medical staff. So let me tell you, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I am vaccine risk aware now, doing my own independent analysis. Now, as an adult internist and cardiologist, vaccines were not a central part of my career. So I didn't dedicate clinical study to it. Like many doctors, I trusted the CDC and the ACIP panel. And this is what I've learned, is that there have been an incredible acceleration and intensification of vaccines given to children. There are now over 200 peer-reviewed papers suggesting that immune system dysregulation is related to neuropsychiatric diseases, including attention deficit disorder, Asperger's, autism spectrum disorder. The leading cause of immune system dysregulation right now is hypervaccination. So there's great concern there. I can tell you on the clinical efficacy side, all the vaccines appear to be fallible. Measles outbreaks, for instance, have occurred among fully vaccinated individuals. The same thing is true for pertussis and mumps. And we know we're not faced with compelling infectious disease threats right now, like pertussis or diphtheria, polio, Haemophilus influenza B. There were fewer than 100 cases of Haemophilus influenza B. I believe 77 in a CDC publication. That's what the HIB vaccine is for. And you know what? More than half of those were fully vaccinated anyway. So the point is, we now have multiple papers, including Mawson, Thomas, and Hooker,
Thomas.
Miller, and all those studies suggest in today's environment, with today's living conditions and current context, that going natural, that is taking no vaccines, that children have healthier outcomes. They have lower rates of atopic dermatitis, asthma, need for tympanostomy tubes, lower rates of neuropsychiatric disorders that I've mentioned. So we can look at it on both sides of the coin. Right now, I'm in line with the World Council for Health, which in September of 2023 came out with a recommendation to actually pause on the childhood vaccine schedule, and let's critically reevaluate and think through this. I couldn't in good conscience tell a parent to go ahead and follow the schedule now, particularly with the COVID-19 vaccines on the schedule.
Those are incredibly powerful, bold statements that we at the HighWire and our nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network, have been a part of. Of course, a lot of the work we've done, we've brought lawsuits that brought transparency to the lack of science, really, that's being claimed by the CDC and the NIH. Oh, we have mountains of evidence that vaccines don't cause autism. When you look in there, there's no mountains. In fact, most of these vaccines have never been looked at. They've looked at one vaccine, the MMR vaccine, and one ingredient, thimerosal, just in the conversation about autism. Now, let me put on you then the big questions that I've always had to, sort of handle. And by the way, I'm just a journalist. I've been on this journey, but you are, not just a cardiologist, you're an epidemiologist. You're capable of, devising studies in which we could investigate this program. But let me ask you this. The big question always, when someone then says, I would say, let's pause the childhood vaccine program, they will say, you are going to cause a return of measles outbreaks, and even worse, polio will come back, and smallpox. Polio and smallpox is this bell that's rung every time someone decides that they're thinking twice about getting vaccinations. What do you say about that? What do you say about the danger of smallpox and polio? If people stop vaccinating, that's the biggest concern there is.
Let's take smallpox now. That should be very responsive to tecovirimat, which is an oral and IV drug that's very effective against monkeypox. We learned that in the pandemic. So if there was a sporadic case of smallpox, the availability of tecovirimat really handles that very well. So I wouldn't have any concerns there. I think polio is a different issue. And fortunately with polio, we have very good water supply testing, and we can get an idea if the three neurotropic strains of polio are even present in the water supply. So we have surveillance, we have treatment. None of these vaccines are sufficiently compelling right now. The world has changed now. It's not the same as it was back in the 60s and 70s.
So, and I've asked you this before, and I'm going to sort of go there again, because I think what we're really lacking is solid science. You have to, they've cherry-picked the science that they say makes these vaccines effective and safe, and there's very little science that's challenged, that orthodoxy. We have multiple presidential candidates that are now running, to be president of the United States. You've got Donald Trump, who has had moments where he has spoken out and has concerns about the vaccine program. You have Governor DeSantis running for president that has spoken out very clearly about the COVID vaccine. And you've got Robert Kennedy Jr. running as an independent now, definitely, clearly has done a lot of work talking about vaccines. And so any three of these guys we know for sure, if they were to get in office, I think have the potential of wanting to do an investigation here. What should that investigation be? For people that are just watching, are starting to ask questions, how should science actually address this issue right now? The childhood vaccine program, what would you want to know, and how would you design studies to find out what's going on there?
All the presidential candidates and then ultimately our future president, they need good advisors. We need far more expert doctors advising the president in teams. We need expert teams. And, when it comes to vaccines, we need experts in infectious disease, but we also need experts on product safety, what's called data safety monitoring. I think it's time now to review each one of these one by one and ask the question, do we have a clear and present public health threat, let's say for pertussis, and then go through the data on, the pertussis vaccine, and then just one by one by one. I think what we'll end up with is probably risk stratification. That is, there may be some regions of the world where there's risk. There may be particular patients who just couldn't tolerate even the slightest risk of one of these infections. It may be more appropriate to take a vaccine. But this idea that each child, starting on the day of birth through age 18, takes well over 100 injections, I think those days are over with. Recent studies and recent sentiment surveys, Kaiser Family Foundation being one, indicate that probably a third of parents now are really backing away from this intensive vaccine schedule.
Yeah. All right. So, and I know you got to run. I really love your time. One more question. We're watching, we've watched your transformation on this conversation right before our eyes. There's been other great doctors that have been, sat on this stage as you have. But do you feel like science is shifting on this? I think the parents have always been shifting. I think that that's where this movement has grown. But are there doctors reaching out since you've been this outspoken, are there people we don't know about that are saying, show me the evidence, Peter, I'm interested, I'm going to look at this too? Do you feel, are you starting to see a shift, at least in some of, our specialists and experts that are out there? Are there some that are willing to take a second look at the vaccine program with new eyes?
It's a slight shift in terms of the academic community. I think very few willing to look at this critically, but we're seeing a much bigger shift in freedom of choice among practitioners. That is pediatricians and family doctors who said, hey, listen, this is up to us to decide together, that we're not going to really pressure families to take the vaccine or railroad them into vaccination. We're seeing some expansion of exemptions in some states to include all three: philosophical, religious, and medical exemptions. So I think we'll see freedom of choice first, then we'll see critical reappraisal second. World Council for Health has done a great service to us by putting out this platform, this statement of, listen, let's put a halt on it. That's going to have everybody consider a reevaluation. And I think it is time for reevaluation. We reevaluate all medicines that we use for common conditions, and the medicines that we used 50 or 60 years ago are not the same ones we use today. And I anticipate the vaccine schedule will take an evidence-based risk stratifications streamlining. For healthy adults and children, it looks like going with no vaccines is probably the best.
If you got a call from the next elected president and said, Peter, we'd like your help, what would be the first steps to righting the ship and the skepticism of science around modern medicine? This ability to look at things again and say, hey, let's just not believe what we're told, go in with fresh eyes. Are there enough doctors and scientists that you could amass with high enough credentials to give this an objective look? I don't think anyone wants to see it shift the other way and you get a bunch of anti-vaxxers running the whole place. But what we want is objective medicine again. Where do you start? Do you start at NIH? Do you start at the CDC, Health and Human Services? What's the most important space when we look at this, the vaccine program in modern medicine, to reevaluate? Where would you start?
Yeah, as a single position, I think the nation's independent second opinion really should come from the U.S. Surgeon General. The HHS secretary is largely administrator over big programs, the Center for Medicare, Medicaid Services, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's more of an administrative position. But we have other bodies that really need a shakedown, including the Institute of Medicine, all the major colleges. I think we do need a corruption sweep. We need to find out which one of these agencies took money to push COVID-19 vaccines. They can't possibly be biased. When I review manuscripts on COVID-19 vaccines, the first question I ask as a reviewer is, did the institution push or mandate vaccines, and did the authors push, mandate, or personally take the vaccines? Once somebody has actually personally taken a vaccine, they have a form of bias. And it's very hard for people to admit they're wrong, particularly in today's age.
Well, Peter, I have to say I'm very encouraged right now. I'm encouraged by what I see. I believe that there's a reset on science. There seems to be, and it's needed, man. Science is on, like I've been saying, it's currently on a ventilator and being given remdesivir to survive. We need to get back to a place of skepticism, real science, where challenges like yours and other great doctors and scientists are taken seriously, they're addressed, their answers and proper studies and investigations are done instead of just avoiding the obvious. Do you feel hopeful that you will see a resurgence of what I would say is real science again in your lifetime? Do we have the ability to make this shift happen?
I think we're going to come into some tumultuous times where big institutions are going to have to come to reckoning. We now see, by proxy, October 4th, both Reuters and the AP are reporting only 1.3% of Americans are taking COVID vaccines. So I can tell you it's essentially over with for the COVID-19 vaccine schedule. but we need a thorough reevaluation of what went wrong. We still have no center in the United States claiming to be a center of excellence in treating COVID-19. We don't have a single infectious disease doctor who claims to be a treatment expert. We don't have a single doctor who claims to be a COVID-19 vaccine development safety expert. There's no one on any of the panels that is really putting a stake in the ground on safety. Now, I've done it as a cardiologist, but I haven't invited to be on these panels. I haven't been invited to give a single grand rounds on vaccine safety in any institution in the United States, and I've lectured at virtually all of them in the past on heart and kidney disease. We need to start having grand rounds on vaccine safety and go through the vaccine injury syndromes, heart, neurologic, cardiovascular, immunologic, and now oncologic cancer. Our practices are now become overwhelmed with these vaccine injury syndromes.
What is a grand round? I don't know that term. What does that mean?
Grand rounds is where in each hospital, all the doctors get together once a week and we review a medical problem. And it usually goes through a range of problems. And, I've been a co-moderator and a presenter at grand rounds. I've been an endowed lecturer at some Ivy League schools and I present at grand rounds. But I can tell you, I've published dozens and dozens of papers on treating COVID-19 as well as on vaccine injury syndromes. Not a single invitation to give grand rounds at an institution and review the data with them. What we're seeing is a willful blindness. It's almost as if these doctors have taken the vaccine themselves and they don't want to hear any bad news because they know they can't get the vaccine out of their bodies.
Wow. All right. Well, Dr. Peter McCullough, I'm just so honored to know you. It's brilliant to watch someone willing to really put it all on the line as you follow the truth. I hope so many other doctors will follow suit and start asking the appropriate questions. You bring a great hope, I think, to the future of medicine and science, and we're here to support you in any way that we can. Thank you so much for your incredible career and your commitment. And thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.